Hello out there, and welcome back to My Grocery Adventure. We are once again with Jeanie Wells for her third installment to hear more about. We're wrapping up the Merc years, the 14, I think, years that she spent at the Merc,
13 to 14. I
13,
can't
14-ish.
guess.
Okay.
2.5
And
maybe.
and the 14 years of career that unfolded after the Merc. So that's where we're headed today. And we'll start, Jeanie, by asking you what were kind of the light spots of the Merc years, kind of the best and brightest memories that you have, and what were the darker spots, some of the harder things that you had to go through in that time frame?
Yeah, I think I'll start with the harder, darker ones first.
Cool. I like your
I
style.
think, you know, uh, as I told sort of the story earlier on, I always felt like I was the accidental GM. I felt like I wasn't, I didn't have the training coming into it that I should have had to be a CEO, and yet that's sort of the same with anybody who gets kind of thrust into this. You just feel like, oh my gosh, now I have to do all these things. And I just wasn't sure, if I had all the skills. I knew I was good at math, and I knew I was good at like seeing a future and a vision of what I wanted to do. But I think learning how to manage people was definitely the hardest thing. We when I started being a GM, we had like 40 employees, and I think we had 130 when I left. And I just feel like that arc was very much the story of me trying to figure it out. And
Mhm.
um, I I think any leader actually has to really think about what kind of leader they want to be. And I think I struggled in the earlier years. I knew I wanted to do these projects. I knew I had a good vision for the store. I think I didn't have a great vision for me as a leader for a few years. And I still felt like, like I was still going to shows with like my staff, and I would be at the same show, and I'd be like, "Hey, yeah, you like them too." But then I would see, like, they would see me like, "What is she doing here? She's not supposed to be here. She's too old to be here.
Mhm.
At some point I realized, "Oh, I'm not their peer. I'm not their peer. I'm the boss. I'm the man."
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, and that was a tough adjustment, I would say, and it took um, kind of some twists and turns for me to get comfortable with that. And then just learning, what does it mean to be really responsible for the entire staff and all the customers and their experience in the store? Um, what does that really mean? And I think I mentioned to you before, there were times where I had to let people go, that I really loved them, but it's like, wow, you are over the line, and I don't really have a choice here. You can't work here anymore. And I hate to have to be the person to do that. And I really did struggle with that. I had to let people go that I really loved. Um, I had to I had to let someone go that he and I started in the first week. And he
What do you mean by that? Like you
we
started the same
started in
time?
the we started in the I was number 286, he was, I think, 288. Like, we started in the same week of 1996 together.
Oh,
We traveled a long road together, but he had really struggled with some substance abuse and alcohol, and it was just like a few years in, it's like, I can't have you work here. This is and trying to do and being able to, I wanted to be a compassionate leader, but I it's like, we're done here. I can't do this. And
mm,
it was just heartbreaking. So I had several things like that where it was like, this is heartbreaking work to be the leader and trying to do the right thing for the business. But kind of coming to terms with, um, like, yeah, I know that you just bought a house and I am terminating you, and that sucks. And yet I can't figure out another way. So I struggled with that. I think the darkest times were always when I had those kinds of moments where I knew I was going to have a very big effect on this person's life, and I didn't want to in that way. And yet I just felt very much the responsibility on my shoulders to do the right thing for this business. Um, and I mean, you as a leader, then the staff start to see you a certain way, like, Jeannie's she drops the hatchet on people, and you're just seen a certain way. Uh,
Yeah.
and you really are just trying to step in and do a good job. The narrative kind of becomes its own. And I think I spent a few years trying to realize I'm not a peer anymore to these people, even though I used to be. Um, and that's an adjustment, I think, for any leader. There were lots of, there were a lot of moral dilemmas, that I was very good. I had the stomach to do hard things. I was a hard worker. I was pretty clear-sighted. Like, I know we're doing this year, so that we'll be in a position to do this next year. And I was very always like, that's what helped me organize all the chaos, was to have kind of a little bit of a plan, even if it didn't always play out the way I wanted. Um, and I was not afraid to do the work to do that, but there were definitely times where I didn't know what the right answer was. Like, if I know the right answer, I will do the work. But if I don't know what to do, that was tough, So there were um, just some really difficult, like, heart-wrenching situations where the the situation needed me to make a decision, and I was completely of two minds. I didn't know what the right answer was, and it was very painful for me. So yeah, when I think back on dark times at the Merc, it was really around me laying awake at night worried about it. Almost always was a people thing, not a money thing, even though there
Mhm.
were a few of those. But it was usually just like, oh my God, what am I going to do about this manager? Or what am I going to do about this? Or, ooh, I've got this long-term member who the staff think he just stole something, and no, I got to deal with that. And um, there was so much of that, and there's no rule book. You're just going off your wits. And also I felt very much like, gosh, I didn't even go to business school. I don't have an MBA. I wasn't trained for this. And so you really just are going off your wits. And I think that that's a common thing for anybody who's in any leadership role, probably.
Yeah.
Um, but certainly I run into it in grocery leaders all the time. I mean, they didn't go to grocery management school, they're just thrust into this and they're winging it.
Right.
Uh, but I think those were the hardest. Um, I mean, I felt like the mayor of a small town. We had a few thousand owners, we had 130 employees, and I just feel like somebody was always sick. Somebody's always having a baby. Somebody's parent was always dying. And it felt like a small town, I think, in that way. People living their lives and having hard things happen to them, and us trying to rally around and support them like a small community would.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's, we got held up at gunpoint. That was a horrible call to get. Um, the police, calling me saying my cashiers had just been, they were at the store, and, that, it's all of that, it's, all of those scary things in life, and they're just happening in your workplace. And you're responsible for it. So it just
Right.
feels different. Um, but I think the highlights of me, uh, that part of my life there, was me. I mean, man, I grew up there. I was
Yeah.
there for 13 or 14 years, and um, I grew up as an adult in that store. I came in still very much feeling like a kid, even though I kind of wasn't. But I still was just kind of scrambling around trying to figure out what to do with my life. And I very quickly, I think, started, like, yeah, I was at the bank, like wearing like, a suit kind of, like, oh, I'm gonna go into a bank and I'm gonna ask them for $1 million. Oh my God, look at me. Oh my God, and it just felt so like, wow, this is weird. But so I was started to do things like that, and I was like meeting with people, and like the local paper was coming, it was just like, oh gosh, how weird, that this is how life turned out. And now I'm like the figurehead of this organization that I just couldn't even believe it. Um, but I think, the highlights for me were just me getting confidence in what I was learning, and me
Mhm.
understanding like, oh, I actually am good at some like stuff you wouldn't know unless you did it. And then you realize, oh, I'm actually really good at business plans. I'm really good at, I'm really good at, this was like something kind of midway through being GM. I realized, oh, I'm actually really good at figuring out what's the long-term goal and what are the tactics to achieve that goal. And I got much better. I felt like at like if I could see people that were like disagreeing about the tactics, it's like, oh, but wait a minute, let's make sure we're both headed in the same place before we start arguing over, whose recipe is better in the kitchen. Let's figure out what the goal is here, and I
Right.
realized, oh, that's like a skill that not everybody has. And I think that helped me to just see like, oh, I actually can do these things, and I can make these connections between this work and help people untangle whatever and put us on a course for something. And certainly, I mean, I was so lucky to be there during at that time, the Merc was all natural foods, pretty much. I mean, I introduced a few conventional foods, and oh my gosh, just about was decapitated for, like I brought in Coke, and it was like, oh, you would think the world ended. But uh I'm saying that a little tongue in cheek. It was
Yeah.
a very big deal to bring in some of that food into the store, into that culture. And yet, it was stuff that people were requesting what they wanted to buy there. And so I did it, but oof, yeah, I was called a lot of names for that. But there again, like I was willing to make a hard decision, even though I knew I was going to have like a steady stream of longtime members, owners in my office, like kind of yelling at me about it, and writing horrible letters to me. And I could withstand that if I thought it was the right thing to do.
Hmm.
Uh, but yeah, I feel like the bright spots were that I grew up and I learned what I was good at and also what I wasn't good at, which was a really important thing to learn.
Absolutely.
Um, I started I loved the projects so much. When we moved in 2001, and then when we renovated 2006, 2007, um, oh, that was the best. Like that, I realized, wow. Well, and also going from the first project to the second project, it's like, oh, there you learn a bunch of stuff on a project, and most managers don't get to do it again and test what they've learned. And I did, and oh, it was so much better the second time. I was like, it was just a really well, it was a good plan, and it was executed well, it was communicated well, all the stuff that
Yeah.
I didn't do well the first time.
Sure.
Um, I felt like I really hit it out of the park with that last project, and loved doing it. I think I had mentioned to you before, like it's weird doing a project at that point, all of my work, I felt like I was in meetings all day long, talking to people, talking to the marketing manager, talking to the sales team, talking to banks or general contract, you're talking to people, talk, talk, talk. But when you do a project, it really is it's visible. It's like, well, here's all my work coming together for the last 5 years. Here it is. And people can walk in the store and see my work in a way that you can't always, like I'm having a meeting about like price image, with my team. Like that's not readily visible to
Yeah.
people until they happened to notice several months later that, oh, now we have all these great deals, like it's very hard to see the results of your work when you're in meetings all the time. And I struggled with that. I very much liked being on the sales floor, and um, I started in produce. I liked handling food and
Yeah.
actually touching the food and cleaning the food. And I liked doing end caps. I liked being on the floor, and my job required that I had all this other work and meetings that I had to do all the time. So I struggled with that, but I loved the projects, and I think they were for sure highlights of, when I think back of my years, I can't help, those were like mile markers on my journey, my outward mile markers. Um, and I think other um mile markers, I guess, that I think about, I was just I just felt like I'm just this scrappy produce girl. I just kind of got thrust into this. And but at some point it's like we started getting awards, which was amazing to me and kind of validate, it's like, oh my gosh, and one of them in 2004, um, I was at this national food co-op conference, and there were in Minneapolis, and there were like 500 people there. And I was there with maybe my assistant at the time and a couple board members, um, and they would always do the awards banquet. They give away 4 awards every year, and you didn't know who it was, that was going to win. And so I'd been the GM for 4 years, 5 years, something. And they gave out the award. They started saying, this co-op has won this award, has successfully relocated. And I'm sitting here at the back of the room going, oh yeah, we did that. And yeah, this co-op, started a nonprofit education foundation. I'm like, oh my God, we did that too. And I'm still just clueless. And then at some point they announce that it's the Community Mercantile in Lawrence, Kansas, that has won the Cooperative Excellence Retailer of the Year award or something. And it was like this, I don't know, it was one of the first times I had like, oh my God, we won an award for our store. And I remember having to walk up to the front of the room, through a sea of people,
A
standing
long walk.
ovation, like the
Ugh.
whole 9 yards. And then of course I had to get up there and try to say something eloquent, which I couldn't at all because I was petrified of standing up in front of this room full of amazing people that had done, like so much more than I had. And
Yeah.
I just felt like, oh my God, I can't believe I have to stand up here and say something in front of these people that I put on pedestals. And but so I just kept it short and sweet, honestly. I just tried to, whatever. But coming home with that award to my store and like sharing it with I was like, and of course many of them didn't even fully appreciate what a big deal that was because they had not been to this conference or whatever, but it's like it was a pretty huge deal. That
Mm.
was one of the first times. And then we won an award in Lawrence for um it was called the Imagination in Place Award, and I can't remember what year this was, but it was like an environmental kind of like environmental excellence in your operations kind of thing. And
Mm.
there was like a ceremony in Lawrence, and we went and won that. And it was just sort of like starting to like see like, okay, well, even if the staff thinks I'm the hatchet lady, we're winning awards, like, so at least there was this like counterbalance to like how hard the work was. There started being these like, oh, but there are some things I can see where yes, it's hard, and it's really hard being a leader when you didn't necessarily set out to be one. But there started being these like nice things that were happening that kind of, they kind of just help like, oh, I think in general we're on the right path here.
Yeah.
And so that
Mm.
was fun. And then I think the last few years I started being invited to these bigger conversations in Topeka and Manhattan and around the state. I was asked to speak in Junction City at this economic development forum that, I got there, and they wanted to hear how we had involved community. It was the theme was something like the community involved in your enterprise or something. But I just thought there were going to be like 20 people. Like, I did not know what I was walking into at all. And so I walked in and there were like 300 people in like suits, and it was like, what is this, And they were all the like state and county economic and commerce department. It was just like all of these people, lobbyists, and I don't even know. I don't know who they were.
Sure.
Um, but I had to get up again. It was like a public speaking kind of nightmare, because it was like, oh my God, I have to get up and speak. And these people all in suits. Like, I always had this feeling like there are people that know what they're doing. And I just, always had that imposter syndrome for sure.
Mm,
And
mm,
I think it's probably common with everyone, but I think it's especially common with women, like, oh, am I good enough to be doing this and all
mm,
that.
mhm.
But so I was certainly wrestling with that day. I had to get up and speak, and I was just a nervous wreck. Like, what am I telling these people who are economic development people? But I just told the story of our store, and there certainly, yes, it was started by hippies and had a very colorful past.
Yeah.
And yet here we were, alive and kicking and growing, 20% a year, and really having an impact,
Yeah.
and making an impact in our community. And so, but it was kind of nice, to be invited. Like, it's very validating to just be in your meetings, doing your stuff, arguing over what soup should be on the hot bar every day, and then being asked to go speak and represent like what all you've accomplished. It's like, oh, that feels pretty good. Um, I was also asked, I started being asked to go to these meetings. I met David Proctor at K-State, who was doing a lot of research on, the value in rural communities and the value of a grocery store in a community, and what um, happens. I mean, like, the data seems very clear. What happens when a town loses a grocery store? Um, and I just found that super interesting, and I loved being invited to those conversations. And then, kind of through there, I met David Proctor, and I met Marcy Penner, and I met, all these people around that were statewide Kansas people primarily, who were having this kind of next level conversation about food systems and food security, and how are we actually going to help these mom and pop grocery stores survive, because it's more than a grocery store. They're actually providing this like valuable resource to their entire community. And I was quite energized by those conversations. I loved being invited to those conversations. And I think it was scratching kind of an itch. I certainly wasn't bored at my store. There was never like never ending list of things to do. But I was sort of like trying to figure out, like, what are we going to do next? What is that next level? And here came all these conversations. I was asked to go speak in Topeka. There at some point I'm sitting at a table. Um, it was the Kansas agriculture secretary, and there was a meeting over milk labeling, and I was asked to go, and I went, and it was like the biggest table I had ever seen. It like, I think there were 80 people sitting around this
My
conference. I mean, it was
God.
just this
Yeah.
huge table, and everybody's in a suit. There was like 3 women, all men in suits, and lots of
Mm,
lobbyists, and lots of state blah blah blah. I don't even know, but it was a fight over the local the local dairy farmers. It was a fight over labeling, and the local small dairy producers in Kansas were, many of them were selling milk that was, hormone free, and they were putting it, on their milk. And then the large conventional milk producers, they were trying to get the state to pass a law that they said that by these small dairy farmers doing that, it put the big dairy producers at a disadvantage in the marketplace because it inherently made their products look inferior. And they were trying to get the state to mandate font size over how big the smaller farmers could put this on their label. It seems like something out of a movie, but yes, I was asked to go and meet that group and meet the agriculture secretary, and all of the big national lobbying like hot shots were there. And but anyway, I loved being invited to those kind, I started feeling like, oh, I've got some, hey, I know some things, I've got some perspective on this, I've got some things to say. And um I mean, looking back on that, I don't know. Yeah, I felt very I don't know. Like I remember saying something that was a little snarky or smug or something about, well, in the on the real sales floors with real customers that are choosing milk, you know, isn't it about, something. But because all these people were like, some of them came in from Washington, D.C., and it was just like, when's the last time you were shopping for milk in a store? Honestly,
Right.
Uh, but yeah, but I liked being asked. I went to Topeka for several issues. That was one of them. I can't remember what else, but um, I just started being interested in that kind of next tier of conversation. The Kansas Rural Center, the Land Institute, like there were and K-State. Um, I had that, sustainable ag team there, and I liked getting out of Lawrence and going and having these like kind of bigger conversations about statewide food policy
Mhm.
and the farm bill, learning all about the farm bill. And so I think, when I think of highlights at the Merc, I mean, part of it was, it kind of made, I was definitely getting interested in these, what is coming next? What's this next level? I was very interested in like food systems and, kind of small farmers' livelihood, which is very much how I started at the Merc.
Right.
It's weird
Right.
to like, oh, there was that thread. Um,
Yeah.
and it was still the thing I was interested in, as it turns out. Um, I love running grocery stores, but I still also had that thread of like, how do we make this work better? How do we make sure smaller producers aren't totally iced out of the market here? And so the last few years, I was invited to go do a lot of that kind of work and those kinds of meetings, and I really was energized by it. Um, all of that to say, I mean, I think that's the backdrop for, even though, when I first started, I had made this personal promise, like I'm going to stay for at least 3 years. And I actually don't remember, I remember almost wanting to quit at 3 weeks, um, because of a thing that was going on. And I was just like, oh, okay, this is not how I want to spend my life. But after I got through that, I actually don't remember crossing the 3 year mark. Like at that point, I was kind of off and running and I forgot to even pay attention. Like, oh yeah, I'm at three
You did
years.
your 3 years. You
I
can
did
leave
my
now.
3 years. Like I didn't even notice. I blew right past it. I mean, we had just, moved into the new store and we were growing leaps and bounds, and, we were in the newspaper. Like I just forgot all about my 3 year marker.
Mm,
Um,
that's the
and
best.
and I don't know that I ever even, I mean, I had never thought back about, well, how many years am I going to stay here, or what am I going to go? Like I think there were people I was offered positions through, as we got more and more strong and successful. I did have people approach me from other organizations, and like, people like, oh, have you ever thought about doing this? And I was like, well, I don't know, but it never, sometimes it was interesting and I always liked being asked, but it never felt like the right time to go because I
Mhm.
got a project or the staff's all upset about I got rid of their two favorite cashiers and they're in an uproar, and if I leave now, that would be real bad. So I always felt, or, as a co-op, I had a board of directors, and, they were always turning over. And, it's a volunteer board. So in a food co-op, everybody can only buy one share. So the board, they're not the people that have the most money that have bought the most shares. They're just the people who ran that are volunteering to be on the board. Everybody has kind of equal voting
Hmm.
in a co-op, but good people volunteering their time, trying to serve as the governing fiduciary of this business and supervise me.
Hmm.
Uh, and uh, boy, you can have years where a really strong personality can very much change the dynamic of the board. And as a GM, that I had 7 board members, and it's kind of like having a 7-headed boss, and
Hmm.
there were some years where we really clicked and it worked great, and it just felt like, yeah, this is good. And there were certainly years where it's like, oh my God, this board is kind of making me pull my hair out. I
Yeah.
had a I had a woman on my board who for 2 years she referred to me as staff, and it took me a while to, like, the first time she did it, she's like, are we going to allow staff in the room for this? And at some point I'm looking around like, oh, am I staff? Oh my God, I'm the CEO and I know about this. You think you know more? You want me to leave? I just couldn't even believe it. I just thought, wow, that is some chutzpah to ask the one person who knows anything about this business to leave the room while you discuss business decisions. And of course, the rest of the board shut her down. But still,
Well, usually I think in that moment she wants to talk about you. If
right,
she
yeah,
needs you to not be there, then the conversation is about to be about you. And it sounds
right.
like the rest of the board was like, we don't need to do that. Like,
We don't need to
Jeannie's
do that.
cool.
Jeannie's gonna figure out how this is gonna work. But yeah, she had like this very weird sense of what her role was, and I think
Sometimes people do. Yeah.
she was a nurse or something. It was just sort of like, I don't know.
Mm.
So there were people like that. There were
Yeah.
people, there were people that had a lot of free time and they sent me a lot of emails, and it's like, yeah, oh, did you like that new sign on that thing? Or, oh, you didn't like how we hung the t-shirts in the street? You're like, interesting. So a lot of people that got on the board were people that had a lot of free time, and bless their hearts,
Yeah.
like they had a lot of questions sometimes. But I, for the most part, had very good relations with my board. And um but there were times where I thought, yeah, I can't leave now. I've got this person
Hmm.
who thinks that the CEO shouldn't be in the room for these conversations. Like, I
Hmm.
not be a good, so I know there were times that I had opportunities to leave, but it never was the right time. And I wasn't even really sure that I wanted to leave or what the right time would even look like.
Hmm.
But then in 2009, um, there was just this opportunity that came, Equal Exchange, which they work with small producers around the globe, and they import fair trade products. And we at the Merc carried their coffee and they were mostly coffee and tea at that point, but they have bananas and olive oil and other things. But it's sort of like, they were very committed to, like, the growth of farmers markets and things in the US is proof that, people really do want to connect with like, who grew my food. And they were really trying to figure out, how to connect people to the stories of, yeah, who grew this coffee, because they're not going to be at the farmers market. They're living, in the hills of Guatemala.
Sure.
Uh, and so, but they're a very stand-up organization. They're still around and they're still doing amazing work. But they approached me in 2009 with an opportunity. They were exploring this initiative, that was, they were trying to do that thing. They were trying to say, like, how do we help people in a grocery store in Kansas or Connecticut or wherever be able to see, like, oh yeah, this is a product that was produced by small farmers,
Mm.
uh, and that the farmers themselves are getting the profits from it, not some intermediary, and so it was sort of this new project they were exploring, and they were wanting to roll it out in the food co-ops. There's, a few hundred food co-ops in the US, and they were trying to figure out, like, is there a way that we could take coffee cooperatives in, Latin America and work with consumer cooperatives in the US and be able to tell this story. So they had this project, and they approached me in 2009 and said, we're importers. We really need someone that understands grocery retail to help us, to be on this team and help us kind of explore this with these stores. And so it was sort of like, it felt a little out of left field. Um, but it was one of those things where I could not think of a reason not to do it. It
Yeah.
was like I hadn't necessarily been looking to go, but I was very interested in these kind of bigger food systems issues. This was a little different, like I was becoming interested in state level,
Hmm.
and regional, and this was like, oh, this is like totally different. And yet it was kind of that same interest, I think. And so, they offered me this position, and I mean, I was contract, so I wasn't an employee per se, but I worked pretty closely with their team, and in a group of stores. And yeah, I could, it's like, well, the staff is relatively happy as the staff's going to get.
Sure.
And the board's relatively stable, and we're through with our project, and we're totally exceeding all of our projections, and I mean, everything was as calm as a grocery store could possibly be that's growing at 20% or whatever. The staff had really good, my basically assistant manager, operations manager, Rita, she was my emergency successor. She was just a great, great asset to that organization. She is, in fact, now the GM there. But, I knew that she would be able to step in. I couldn't think of a reason to say no. Um, and so I said yes. And, but it was super weird to say yes and to think about leaving this job that I felt like I accidentally had, and that I accidentally grew into, and that I accidentally was good at. It felt very weird to then be contemplating an exit. Um, but I did. I left in June of 2009, and I feel like I I I feel so lucky that I know a lot of general managers who've left their co-ops after a long time, who leave under a cloud, or there's a catastrophe happening, or something unsavory has happened, or I don't know. I feel so fortunate that I got to leave, like, it almost felt like, carried on the, people, I mean, I was so showered with
Yeah.
appreciation when I was leaving. And I mean, appreciation that I didn't always feel at the time. And yet I really felt like I was able to leave like feeling pretty good about where we were when I came and where we were when I left. I felt very proud,
Yeah.
and I feel very happy that I got to leave on kind of a high note. And at my last general membership meeting with we had 500 owners or something in the board, and they were just rattling off the stats from, in 1999 versus 2009. So 10 years as a GM, it was staggering. It
Yeah.
was like, oh yeah. And I, of course, didn't do it by myself. I had so many great people that, certainly helped carry the load and make things happen, and really good ideas. And, the people that really went to the mat to make things happen.
Yeah.
Um, it definitely was not me. But it felt really good to leave on a really high note, and to get that as an outgoing GM, because a lot of people don't get that. And
Yeah.
I felt like it was really great, and I feel very fortunate in that way.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, and then so I left there and started working at Equal Exchange or with them for I had an 18-month contract. Um, where, I flew around to some of the stores they were working with. They're based in Boston, so I went back and forth to Boston, and I kind of met their whole organization, which was when I realized I was very successful as a CEO. I knew how I was really good at organizational charts. I was really good at process and planning. I was really good at this stuff. And I knew that if I did these things, success would happen. And then I go to Equal Exchange and it's like they didn't do anything like the way I did it. Like, I don't think they did a single thing like how I did it. And at first it was like, well, this can't possibly work, but of course it did work. It worked really well for them. And so I feel like in my time with them, what I learned as two very valuable things happened in my time there. One was that I learned there's not one way to success. And it doesn't matter that that was the Jeannie Wells recipe for success.
Sure.
There are so many other ways to be successful. And I really did need to learn that because I had exactly one experience of success and I needed to
Right.
see another model. And they definitely had different model. Like I asked them once to draw me the organizational chart and I wish I still had it. It's comical. Like they couldn't even really draw it. They were like, well, no, I mean, we ask our, they're on a team and it's like, oh my God, like it's very nonlinear and yet works. Like they
Mm,
have staff engagement I have never seen a more committed group of people, so it's like
yeah.
clearly this is working and clearly their metrics show that their work is having an impact, so that was a super valuable lesson for me. That was one big thing that happened there. And the other big thing that was really necessary that I didn't realize, which I guess is related, but at the end of that, I came back in and started consulting with food co-ops through what was then CDS Consulting Co-op, which became Colluminate. And so I'd be working directly advising general managers around the country, people that used to be my peers. But I'm so glad that I had a different experience to go away and have a little bit of time and space between being a GM and advising GMs because I think I needed some perspective in order to be good as an advisor. And I think if I would have just gone straight from one to the next, I don't think it would have worked as well. I think I
Mhm.
really needed, full closure, go do a different experience completely, and
Mhm.
then come back into it kind of fresh. And looking back, I think that was super essential for me to be successful as a consultant.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, I loved my time at Equal Exchange. Uh, they took me to Guatemala and we went up into the mountains and I picked coffee on the hillside with these small coffee producers.
So
And
cool.
I mean, just had a mind-blowing experience there. Like this is what small farming looks like outside of the US.
Mm,
And yeah, these women, I mean, they're Mayan descendants, and they still weave their own cloth and make their own clothes and wash in the river and dry their beans out in the sun. And, it
yeah.
was completely fascinating to me.
Yeah.
Like, oh, and then these beans, they get put in these bags, they go to this place where all these women sit and sort beans and they're dressed in amazing clothes. I'll send you pictures. I have
Yeah,
pictures
we'll
of
put
these
some pictures
women.
here. Yeah.
And it it was amazing. And then, just meeting, I mean, it's a very small community. Some of them, they've, I'm not very good at acre and hectare, I don't know, but they had very small pieces of land. And, some of them, they were in these coffee co-ops and some of them, like their garden to grow their own tomatoes and corn and whatever, and chickens, like they had only so much land and they had to feed their family on their own. So they might only have room for 2 coffee trees or 6 coffee trees, like, but that's all that was left. They'd grow a little bit of coffee and then they would combine that, this whole village, they'd combine their little bits of coffee beans together and sell it as, as a bigger, like, oh, we are the Chahul was the name of the place, process, that they would sell these bags of coffee, by working together. And it was so amazing. It was amazing.
Yeah.
And I just think I needed that, like, kind of complete, like, phew, this is different. And I love coffee, and of course got, a whole new appreciation for how hard it is to pick a coffee on the side of a mountain. That's not easy. And I was so slow. Like, these guys are up there pulling the coffee beans, and I'm just like, oh geez, did I get it? Yeah. I was terrible at it. But anyway, it was an amazing experience. And like I said, it kind of was I needed this, like, block of time before, because when I came back in, then that contract was done, and I came back in to start consulting directly with food co-ops, working with CDS Consulting Co-op, which they were the consultants I hired when I was a GM. So the people that helped me do financial performance, and the people that helped me do store planning, and the people who
Mm-hmm.
helped me with board governance, like, and now I was one of them, which felt so weird. Like, my very first meeting with them was in 2011, and I remember sitting in a room, and we're having a meeting in San Diego, and I'm there's like 12 people there, and I'm looking around the room, and these are like I mean, heroes. These are my heroes, my icon. Like, this is the Mount Rushmore of food co-ops in this room. And here's me. And I'm just like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm sitting in this room with them. And again, a whole imposter syndrome thing all over again, because I was
Yeah.
just like, I am sitting in between these two giants,
Mm-hmm.
and they're talking to me, and they're asking me what I think, and it was just like, why are they asking me? I'm just this scrappy produce, like, I don't know. But again, it's like, oh, actually, I did have an opinion, and I did know
Oh,
some things, and I just
yeah.
didn't know that I knew some things, and um so that was really amazing to go from, like, these people that I revered so much, and then they invited me to come be a consultant with them. That was powerful. Again, it was like that, it's that bigger conversation again.
Yeah.
But I would say, I am still a consultant with Colluminate. I still work with food co-ops and mom and pop stores, all over the US and Canada, which is great. Um, I like to say I'm international. I actually do have a store in France that I've heard about that's interested in my, anyway, so it's like, yes, yes, oh, oui, I will come there, I will help.
That's
Um,
so awesome. Yeah.
yeah. But I so I feel like that story of my life as a consultant is still happening. And so I feel like when I've talked to you about what it was like at the Merc or coming to the Merc, like, that feels very easy to look back and go, oh yeah, I can totally see how I got here. This one is a little harder for me to describe because I feel like I'm very much in the middle of it. But I will say, in the common threads that have pulled me forward this whole time are, I am really energized by looking at both, like, the big macro pick, like, how does this all work together? How is this network of independently owned grocery stores gonna ensure healthy, stable communities in our country, during a time of intense consolidation of, all of that. I'm very interested in that story. I'm also, so I feel like that's like the big level. I feel like I'm also interested in, like, I love going into these tiny little communities on the edge of the wild and untamed prairie. And it's like, here is a little grocery store, usually being carried on the backs of some women. There's a lot of women in small grocery, and they are making it happen. Like, our
Yeah.
town grocery, we're going to have a grocery store, and they, like, make it happen.
Yeah. And so it
But
is.
I get a lot of inspiration going into these little towns and big cities, and just seeing like what does it look like to bring food to this community. Um, I think I used to work mostly with food co-ops, and I anymore. I mean, I am known in the food co-op world, but I increasingly, I think my work with the rural grocery folks at K-State and just word of mouth, I guess. I do like working with the mom and pop grocery stores a lot. And I get a lot of inspiration and energy by going into these
Mhm.
little tiny towns, really pulling my heartstrings. Um, and like, oh my God, they want grocery and they're trying to figure out how to keep the teenagers from moving away. Like they're trying to provide jobs. They're trying to give these teenagers something to do after school, because otherwise they're just, teenagers, those kids. But yeah, so I feel like, I still love the big picture and the little picture. Um, but my consulting work has, I think, evolved since I left. I um I mean, you take your best guess at, well, I think people would want to hire me for this, and then the market will really tell you what they want to hire you for,
That's
and
right.
stuff I thought I would be doing a lot, I didn't hardly do at all. And stuff that I thought, yeah, I'm pretty good at this, I can help people with this. Um, has been, like I'm thinking of organizational structure and capacity planning work. I knew that was one thing I like to do. Um, I mean, up until very recently, I would say, that's 50% of what I've done is fly around the country and help people figure out how to untangle and clarify their roles and responsibilities, either because they're getting ready to expand and so they're trying to figure out where to add, you know. Um, I've done a lot of that kind of work, and I weirdly love it. I love, like, yeah, let's read these job descriptions. Oh no, wait, now it says here that they, like, it's so bizarre. It's very specific, but I really do love it. And I love, uh, I love making beautiful organizational charts.
Yeah,
I
dude, I
like
get it.
I love it colorful, and that's like the art, like that's the
Sure.
art student part of me, right? But it's like I want them to look inviting. I want them to look good. And so yeah, I do a lot of that work, like a lot of capacity roles, responsibilities kind of thing. And I still do that, but I would say in the last few years, I'm doing more. Well, the other thing that's happened is some of those giants that I was in a room with in 2011 um, have almost all retired. I mean, they're gone. I mean,
Hmm.
one of them, like Bill Gessner, is like one of my biggest heroes ever, and he died suddenly a few years ago. Um, but it's like there are these people that were always there as the consultants that people could call, and they're not there anymore.
Hmm.
And so there's been this shift that's happened where I realize, oh,
That's you now.
old. Oh God, I'm like one of those. I'm one of the old people. But it is weird to like kind of
Yeah.
just see there's been a huge shift. And I think and at a time, I mean, like not even including the pandemic, but just the consolidation of the food systems in America and Canada too. Um, the landscape that these stores are operating in is so different than it was even when I was at GM. When I was at GM, it was pretty fun, still hard, but I mean, we were growing and growing and growing and growing. We were growing in spite of ourselves, and they just don't get to do that anymore. They don't get a 2-year runway to figure out how to read a balance sheet. They actually have to be able to manage their cash perfectly from their very first day. There's no forgiveness in the marketplace now. So I think, the competitive landscape has changed so much, and the number of independent stores is shrinking, and the sales growth of independent stores is shrinking, and the access to warehouses and minimum orders and all of that, everything is working against these small grocery stores. And yet, I just think it's the answer to healthy communities. And so I feel like my job in this world is to help these locally owned grocery stores really understand what it means to be in business right now in this landscape and how to navigate it, and to support them in their work. Like, I don't have all the answers. Um, I know some things and I'm pretty good at framing some things, but I don't know their communities at all. I know grocery really well. I don't know their
Mhm.
communities at all.
Mhm.
And so I always feel like, my job is to support them because they know a lot about who's in their town and what that town needs. And my job is to help them be a really successful home office. They don't have a home office to like mail them the marketing plan or mail them the wage scale. Like, they're trying to figure out, I don't know, this guy wants a raise. I don't know if I should give him a raise. I don't want to lose him, and like that's what they're trying to decide. And they have no wage, like they have no basis to make a decision, so I'm just
Yeah.
like, oh, well, maybe you could think about it like this, like if you do that, will he be making more than every other woman in your business? You might not want to do that, like
Just some information to
just some
consider,
information.
That's all. Still your
But
decision.
I just feel like, people just think, let's start a grocery store. That sounds fun. And I think if you're a large chain, it's so much easier. You're basically just you're an implementer.
Hmm.
Oh, here's the plan from corporate office. I'm gonna
Hmm.
oh, here's what we're doing this year for Thanksgiving. Oh, here's what we're doing this year for wage scale. Here's what we're doing for training this. Like, everything is just
Hmm.
like prepared for them. And then, like, in the pandemic, I mean, all of the price changes and inflation that happened, like, yeah, big chain, Safeway and Walmart. I mean, they have teams of people who are analyzing, oh, this price went up. Do we want to raise our price of butter? It went up 5%. Should we raise it? Or they've got people to decide that. Whereas all these mom and pop stores, I mean, they usually have terrible point of sale systems to begin with. They usually don't have systems developed to catch price increases that are coming in every day, every week. And so, yeah, all these stores lost a ton of margin in the last few years just from not having a home office help them with price changes.
Yeah.
Maybe their warehouse helps them, maybe not, kind of depends on which one. But yeah, so I just feel like my job now, especially with all these other consultants that have left, I just feel like, oh my gosh, there's a mountain of need out there. And I am just trying to figure out how to help these stores stay strong and serve their communities, whatever that means. Um, and at a time that I just think is excruciatingly difficult. It was hard before the pandemic, and then, now there's not enough workers. That hiring crisis is still happening, and food inflation, it's better 2023, but it's still a volatile,
Yeah.
and having to manage that, and there's still food shortages and little stores get shorted, like guarantee at Thanksgiving, like, oh, we've only got so many cartons of heavy whipping cream. Well, they're going to give them to the big stores. And so the little store doesn't have some essential stuff that people might be looking for.
Hmm.
It's just so hard. It's so stacked against the small independent retailer. And so I am on a mission to have, I am absolutely on a mission to, like, weirdly, I am good at grocery, and I am just trying to help people have the best possible grocery resource in their communities, whether that's a community within a huge metro area or it's a community in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
What does that community need? And um, it's more work than I can do. I travel a lot, and I do love traveling. But I learned during the pandemic that, I can actually do quite a bit remotely, which I would have never guessed.
Yeah.
And so coming out of the pandemic, I'm doing a lot more online. Uh, I'm on Zoom all day long with my clients. I do a lot of one-on-one coaching. I have managers around the country that I have, weekly or bi-weekly calls with, that I just help them through whatever.
Mhm.
So I do a lot of that. But I do a lot of I'm doing less one-on. I feel like I'm doing less one-on-one work anymore because I just can't get everywhere I need to go. So I'm like, I'll go to a conference and I'll talk to, 50 people like, okay, I can't come to each one of your stores. So okay, I'll talk. You like, let's do this together. I've only got time to say this once. So let's, get 50 people in the room.
Mhm.
So I'm doing that at conferences, I feel like more and more. And then last year I launched the Mighty Community Markets, which I have to mention.
Yeah.
Uh, but it was sort of the culmination of all of the, everything happening and me recognizing like I can't get everywhere. And so, I was joking that I switched from man to man to zone defense, like, okay, I'm going to say it once, you all take notes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I can't, and for the little stores, it's, I'm self-employed. I consult with, under the umbrella of Colluminate, but I'm self-employed. So it's sort of like, in order for me, there's no one paying me to go work with somebody. Like the store has to pay me to come there.
Yeah.
And the thing that I don't like is, these small stores, some of the ones who need me the most, it's very hard for them to bring me there.
Mhm.
They can't. And so this online program, Mighty Community Markets, the first big one that I'm getting ready to start next week, my third semester that I've done it. But there's like a grocery store boot camp, just like, okay, you're in charge of a store. Let's figure out some of the fundamentals that you need to run a grocery store that probably nobody told you, So it's like
Mhm.
a crash course in grocery. And it has 6 parts. But I'm starting to also do some intensives where it's like, okay, now we're just going to talk all about price, image, and price strategy, or I'm gonna do a whole one on organizational structure that I can't wait.
Dude, that's awesome.
It's gonna be great.
Yeah.
I'm so excited to do it. But so I feel like I'm rolling out more content, because I realized, oh, I can do these kind of virtually and people can access them. Even the grocery store boot camp series, they're live classes, but we video all of them so that people can go back and watch. They're like, I can't attend a middle of the day Thursday.
Sure.
I'm busy, so they're doing it at night, watching the recordings. But yeah, when I first launched it last fall, I had 105 people from Canada and the US sign up. I was expecting like 30.
That's amazing.
It was amazing. And so it was sort of like, oh, okay, this is a thing. And
Yeah.
the interesting part is I mostly built this as a cost-effective way for really small stores to get access to some training they need. Um, and a way for me to meet them virtually, even if I can't come to their store. I mostly built it for that. But what's happened is like each time more than half of the people that are taking it are department managers. So the larger stores are like, you know what? I have 100% turnover in my management team. I don't have time to train them. And they're just like sending their whole management teams to the session. So I've got stores that are doing 400,000 a year, on the call. And then I've got like store managers from, $80 million a year organizations, multi-store on the same call. And, so it's just like, wow,
Mhm.
it's so interesting. So the conversations are kind of interesting because, but it's the same principles. It's just the
Right.
scale community you're
Right.
operating
That's what I
But
was gonna say is like it proves that like grocery is grocery is grocery is grocery. Like it's just how much volume are you doing is sure, but it's all the same recipe.
the same, and really understanding like what's your environment, like if you're one of 20 stores, like, what's your strategy to survive there? Like it's not enough to be just one of 20 stores without a very compelling story. Like why should
Mm-hmm.
someone walk it? Why should someone come to your store? What
Mm-hmm.
are you doing? What impact are you trying to have, and how are you telling that story? Because you know I can go to a Walgreens and buy, I mean, grocery is everywhere.
Yeah.
And so to get people to walk into your door, and it's a volume game, so these really tiny towns, it's like, yeah, how to carry just the right products so that they can generate enough sales to actually pay for staff, I mean, it's tough.
Yeah.
It's really tough. But apparently, weirdly, I love it. And it's like, I feel like in every conversation I've had with you, it's been so accidental in a way. I didn't, I mean, my dad, I think I mentioned this, my dad,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
grocery broker, my mom was in business, like, I think I did sort of like, there's something there that probably came from way back. Uh,
Yeah.
but I love food. Oh my God, I love food and I love eating and um, and I love gardening, so like somehow that stew of stuff kind of showed up, brought me to a grocery store, and then I was good at math and I could see, I could do process really well and organize chaos really well. And,
Mm.
I don't know. It's so funny the way
Yeah.
life turns out. And I think my story is probably completely common. Like I think this happens to everybody, that
I
you don't
agree.
always know where you're going. Most
Yeah.
people don't.
Yeah.
And but
And that
yeah,
you don't have to. It's
you
not
don't have
it's
to.
not a requirement that you know the point of why the produce part-time job at the Merc is the right way to go. It just was the most exciting thing you could do with your time at that moment. The closest match and you did it and that literally changed your whole life to
It
accept
changed
that
my
teeny
entire
little
life.
part-time job, like
Yeah,
you don't have to have a big fancy plan. You just don't. And I love your story for that reason. I absolutely love it. I'm like, she figured it out with zero plan, and I feel like I did
definitely
basically
not
a
the
very
one.
similar thing. Like I didn't know where I wanted to go or what I wanted to do, but I knew what it felt like. I knew that it gave me energy. It was fun. It was probably something with people. It made a real impact in people's lives. Like I had stuff like that that I could point to and say, I want to do that. But I had no idea that that was grocery. That
Right.
came way later, Like, so yeah, like getting to know yourself and like what do you like and what is interesting to you? What do you get passionate about? What even fires you up a little bit, makes you a little sassy? Like, ooh, I don't, I want to fight that thing. Like, I don't like it that odds are stacked against small town grocery. That really irritates me. Me too. And so, yeah, I want to get on their team. I want to be on their side and I want to use my time and my energy, limited as though it may be, to be an advocate, be a helper, be a bridge builder that can make it more possible for more people to keep their access to food. Like,
I,
yeah,
I just think, I mean, in a way, like, seems so basic, and yet, it's like it seems so essential. And yeah, and it's just, I think I do think there are a few people in the world that, like I remember being in high school, with people that are like, I am going to be a equine veterinarian. And like, I mean, they're just like, this is what I'm doing. I'm on this
sure,
path to do this thing. And I
sure.
did know people like that. But I actually think that's a really small majority. I mean, minority of people. I think the majority actually don't know.
Yeah,
I think there's this other thing that happens with women anyway. I've heard other people say this, so it's not my original thought, but that women are often raised to think about who they want to be, and men are raised to think, what do they want to do? And I think
Mhm.
that that is a really interesting thing. Like just like with my good friend last night, we were talking
Mhm.
about like, okay, yeah, I know what I want to be. I can see that part. But let's talk about the work we want to be doing, and I just
Mhm.
think
That's
people
interesting.
spend that much time with girls talking about like it's not, yeah, you can see yourself driving a car with certain hair, like you can see yourself being a certain way in life, but what is the work you actually want to be doing
Yeah,
and that you can see yourself doing? And 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 that's probably why a lot of people don't know what they want to do with their life, is they haven't quite figured that out yet. But I guess my advice would be, um, follow the stuff you like and that you're interested in, and figure out what you know, I think you have to have a variety of experiences and to be able to see, oh, I like that. Oh, I don't like that. Or, oh, I like doing this work. Oh, I don't actually like doing that work. Or, oh, I'm good at this. Oh, I had no idea I was good at that because I didn't put myself in this situation before. And
sure.
so I think people that don't really know, they're not on the veterinary or physicist track.
Yeah.
Uh, you
Well,
know,
and that was something else we were talking about before we started recording is like you can be good at a lot of things. That doesn't mean that you should do it. And
right,
sometimes I think, and this is not for everybody, obviously, but like sometimes I think the people who make the plan, they know at 7 years old, I'm going to be a doctor, and they just like put their head down and like become a doctor. I don't know if they're always the happiest people,
right, yeah. A lot of
like
times,
just because you can make a plan and make it happen doesn't always mean that you should.
right.
So sometimes kind of like having the multiple experiences. And if you have a job where you walk away and you're like, you know, I like to say one of the jobs I had taught me how not to run a business.
Uh-huh.
Like the
Oh
way I
yeah.
worked there and the way I was managed and the way management functioned, or at least what I could see from my position of the way management functioned, I left there knowing that I want to do it exactly the opposite of that. So that's not a wasted experience. That's a
Right, yeah.
really helpful experience. It's very clarifying for who are you and what do you want it to be? How do you want to do it once you actually have the power and authority to make it how you want it to be? So,
Totally. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, we all had terrible bosses. I mean, usually by the time you end up running a grocery store, you've had a series of bosses, and some of them I mean, I know I definitely was like, oh, I really like the way she,
Mm-hmm.
like my very first boss, I thought, wow, she was, like I thought of her. Like she was a leader
Yeah.
at the fast food place. Here was this, unsuspecting great leader,
Yeah.
Nancy, I can't remember her last name, but that was the first job I had. So she didn't even just have to tell us what to do, that day, but she had to teach us how to be an employee,
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and I think that's the other thing that happens in grocery stores too. It's like, yeah, this is their first ever job. So it's not just that you're telling them how to stock out the milk. You're
Right.
teaching them what it's like to be an employee.
Right.
And they, I'm sorry, but you have to teach them that too.
Some of them, I will say, their parents have clearly taught them how to manage their own responsibilities, manage their own time. They can work off of a list, and maybe some people are better at that than others. And some people, they clearly have no experience managing responsibility of any kind. They don't know how to manage their own time. And it's like, yeah, at that point, you need those skills to be able to have a job and like get your job done while you're at your job. So it's amazing how much life skills a grocery store manager has to teach, especially the high school kids mostly. It's usually not adults that you're having to teach these things to sometimes, not always, but yeah, it's
Yeah. Like,
amazing. It's
what is it
oh
like to be on time? What is it like
right.
to take feedback and
What
not
is it like to answer the phone and fake your way through a conversation that you don't know the answer to, and then somebody drives an hour because you told them yes, and now they show up in the store and the real answer was no. and they're standing face to face with you and they are mad.
They're
They're
mad.
mad and they're mad at you because you faked it instead of say, I don't know, can you hang on? Let me go check. Let me go
Yeah.
get the manager to help me with this. Like the consequences of not being willing to be honest, to ask for help, like there's so many different moments that can pop their head up in, yeah, especially for the kids. They can get in over their head real quick and you just hardly even know what to look for at the very
And
beginning.
yeah, and then, they look sideways at their peers to see like, well, how is that person handling it? And if you've got some, like, I don't know, maybe it's a food co-op thing, but we had so many like, oh man, like we were their first stop on the way to change the world, and they're gonna fight
Mm,
every single thing all the time. It's just
mm,
like, oh, this is exhausting. We're up against Walmart, people.
yeah,
Like, let's not argue about whether or not you have to wear a name tag or not. Like, wear
yeah.
the tag and then let's get on with business, but it's like
Hmm.
sometimes you're like having, and then you've got new employees that are like, oh, is it okay to talk back to say no? It's like, no, it's actually not okay to say no. But they're looking sideways. I think in food co-ops, there's always this like undercurrent of, I don't know if I should say this or not, but I have a GM that I work with who, um, yeah, I better not say it because they might listen. But I just think it's so funny, the way they talk about there's always somebody willing to start a revolution,
Yeah,
and um, and just some really interesting ideas about, I remember workers. I would say, hey, it looks like those dairy doors are all smeary. Like, can you get that cleaned up? Yeah, like I'm just walking by, to get my coffee, and I see it like, oh, hey, that's a mess. Can you grab a towel and get that? And they look at me like, you know. And I learned in my later sassy years that my response to that was, oh, don't worry, we're going to pay you to do it. It was like super
that's
simple.
what my initial thought was like, are you on the clock or not?
I know,
Are
but
you
it's
at
like
work or not? Like,
sometimes they
dude, come
just
on.
forget. And I don't know if it's especially at a food co-op or, it's a college town, I don't know what it was, but there was always a certain amount of that, that you're
Mhm.
to be a success. I've known a lot of general managers that come in from, oh, they used to manage a store manager at a Kroger store, or suit and tie every day to work or whatever, and then they get hired as a general manager at a like some hippie natural foods co-op kind of thing, and their first call to me 3 months in is usually, uh, I don't know, like everywhere I've worked, if I say do something, they just do it. And then I came here and I say, can you go do this thing? And they act like I'm asking them to cut out. I'm like, ah, yeah, yeah, there's a cultural thing that, a lot of people that are used to top down environments, you come into a
Mhm.
food co-op. I mean, the employees mistakenly always think that the co-op part refers to like the management. It's like, no, no, this is not cooperatively managed. This is cooperatively owned. It's top down managed, like you're confused. You don't get to vote on whether that person gets fired or not. It's
Yeah.
owned by the community. It's not managed by the community. So there was always
Mm.
a lot of conversations, and maybe that's everywhere. That was certainly my experience, and these are kids that are studying like, uh you know economic systems in college, and then they're, like their first stop after work is the food co-op, and it's like, we should have the blah. I mean, I love your passion, but can you use it to help us sell groceries?
Yeah.
Because we're fighting for our lives to stay, like, but
Right.
so, that was, I feel like that was definitely part of my experience. And I know that's not the same everywhere. But, it is something to step inside of any values driven organization, like to be a good
Yes.
leader in that environment, you have got to understand that it is not all about the money. It's not all about the bottom line. It really is about being a great employer. And what does that mean? And if you've got a lot of idealism and rebel rousing in your staff. Like you have to manage through that. You have
Yeah.
to figure out how to connect them to some, actually it's this higher purpose here we're trying to do, and you got to reel them in. But man,
Yeah.
it's sometimes.
It's an art form all by itself.
Yeah.
It's part of the general manager art form is trying to, especially in like a small business, obviously not the same as a co-op, but like, yeah, I mean, the whole reason that I left corporate was because I was walking away from that top down power over you do it because I said so. And if you don't want to, then get the hell out and we'll park somebody else in your chair.
Yeah,
And
right.
that was a big part of I don't want to do it like that.
Yeah,
I want to hear people's ideas. I want their passion. I want them to feel invested and have ownership over what they're doing. Like that's how I want them to feel. But when you get people who can do that, it's like now they have a really strong personality and now you have multiple strong personalities. And so, yeah, it's like it has its own challenges, even though it's free from like the top down, like you're
right.
forcing
Sure.
things. Like, yeah, it's
It's
a whole
all
thing.
I think
Oh,
it's all hard, and I think anybody who says it's not is can't. I mean, it's all hard, and um, and you never feel trained up for it, and you never feel quite ready for it,
yeah,
and there's always something that you didn't plan on, which is tough for a planner like me, to be able to
sure.
roll, to have the flexibility to be like, all right, so my entire weekly plan, I am just going to throw out the window, and we're
Yeah.
going to do this instead.
Hmm.
That's a constant thing, but
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know. I feel that I feel pretty lucky to work with I mean, I love working with grocery store people, and I think yeah, like even just saying to you like I just want them to wipe the doors, and just seeing your face like you're incredulous, like yes, of course, like why wouldn't they? Like
Do it.
I feel like there's kind of a camaraderie with grocery store managers that it's like, and especially during the pandemic, I mean, like what people have gone through during the pandemic, um, which we didn't even hardly talk about, but
I
it's
know.
probably its own show, but it's, real horror stories
Yeah.
out there, some shining examples of wonderful human behavior coming together to, work together as a team to, keep everybody safe in the community. And then also just some, tales of really bad human behavior,
Yeah.
and really brought out the worst in some people, and um and trying to be a leader through that, no playbook at all for that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, I I'm amazed that there are people that are committed to leading their grocery store despite all of this,
Yeah.
despite not quite having enough staff, despite having, to deal with all the pandemic stuff they had to deal with, food shortages, warehouse, price increases, and then, just, snarky, comments, you're just like, man, you have to have pretty tough skin, I think, to be.
You have to care a lot
Yeah,
about keeping groceries in your community, you
you
know?
gotta.
And if people want to push back on you and they want to, be sassy about the limits or the process or the masks or whatever it is, and it's like, dude, like kind of like what you're saying about the employees and like they're wanting to start a revolution. They're wanting to fight with me about this. And I'm like, I'm trying to keep groceries in my community. Like, I
Right,
hear you.
exactly,
That's interesting. And this is so much more important
right,
than one person's negative opinion.
right.
This is about something much bigger than that. So please step aside and let me put groceries in the community. Like, I feel like it's like deep heart, like deep caring that keeps people in grocery and it attracts those people who have that to begin with.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, I think you're exactly right. It's like it's just constantly trying to refocus people on the big picture,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
um but in the end, like I was in the Merc the other day, and I had recently posted this picture on my Facebook page of my very first day, or maybe first week, uh,
Hmm.
when I started in produce, and and they took new hire pictures, for the break room or something. I don't even know. But there's this picture of me standing in front of the produce case, on my first week. And it's so funny to me, like I really looked at that picture of me and like just kind of looking in my eye, it's like at that moment I was just taking a part-time job, and there was a lot of stuff happening in my life then, what felt like a lot happening at the time, which um but it was a decision. I was making a decision to apply for this job, interview for it, and then take the job, and I was coming off of waiting tables where I was making like a lot of money without working very many hours. I worked at a place in Lawrence that was, I could make $200 a night, and I was leaving that to go work for $4.75 an hour at this food co-op,
Yeah.
because I wanted to learn about local food systems or whatever. But yeah, I looked at that picture a good long time, and I was just like, man, that was a little decision that I had no idea at that moment that I was like stepping onto a path that I would still be doing, 27 years later, and still trying to figure out like foods. It's so interesting to me to look at my own face on that day and just like, wow, I was clueless what I
Yeah.
was. I knew what I wanted to do, but I was really clueless of what a really consequential decision. That one little decision was pretty impactful in terms of my life. And but it was also very interesting, like on Facebook, like to so many people responded to this picture, and I was like kind of looking at who commented and who liked it, and like so many former employees and so
Yeah.
many former board members and so many former employees that I thought really thought I was the man, and I was always out, like, always talking about financials, and there were some really sweet words on there about like, wow, I'm really glad you made that decision too, or thanks so much for
Mhm.
up with us when we were unruly or whatever.
Mm.
And it's like, it's kind of nice. It's so delayed, like at the time I was sort of like, I do and do and do for you kids, and this is the thanks I get, and now to see it, that's the blessing, I guess, of a little bit of time going by, because then people
Yeah.
can say like, oh yeah, she was just a produce worker who accidentally became the GM and was doing the best she could, and
Yeah.
she's okay,
Yeah.
all things considered, I did pretty well for that. Or
Well, and I think sometimes like people who are some of the most feisty in the moment back then, and then they go forward to get to be promoted into their own leadership position, and they manifest one or two that are just like they were, and all of a sudden they've got a whole new level of appreciation for what
oh
Jeannie
yeah,
was putting up with. It's like
so much.
because you've been there now and you get what I was doing and what I was trying to say about the bigger picture. Like they get it now because they
Yeah,
lived it.
there's
Yeah.
a woman, she actually was the mayor of Lawrence for a while, but she was a cheese buyer for us. And then, boy, she was always a like, we should be doing this better, we should be doing more. Like she was always just pushing, pushing, pushing. Uh,
Hmm.
and she was a good worker, and but she was always just like, oh my God, it was just never enough, never enough. And then she went to law school and she became an attorney, and all of this. And then she later came back and was on the board at the Merc, and I ran into her at a co-op conference.
Uh-huh.
She came up to me and she said, I just got to tell you, thanks so much for putting up with me, because she could then see like, yeah,
Yeah.
a little bit
Yeah.
of a thorn in my side, but also, it was her ideas were right. It was just like, we can't feed. I don't know what we're gonna do about all the home. I don't know. I can't do everything, and she was
Hmm.
really like, we should be doing more. That was always her thing.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think a little bit of time they go on. Hopefully they, oh yeah, so I was gonna say I posted that picture on Facebook, and had kind of an amazing response on there. It was kind of fun for me just to read. And then like I think it was that day I had to run to the Merc to pick up a few things.
Uh-huh.
Went to the store at like 5 p.m. on whatever night, and the store was just hopping, but I think from talking to you, and then I was like looking at that photo, and then I was in the Merc, and like even just pulling up into the parking lot, it was just like, oh man, I remember moving into this building, and I remember
Yeah.
remodeling the front end, and
Mm,
walking in and just like seeing it so busy and bustling, and they've changed, moved stuff around since I was there or whatever, but it was really happened when I was in there. And then I was getting ready to go through the line, and I ran into somebody I knew, which of course you can't go there without, like, it feels like a very small town
right.
there, but it's very, you can't just run in and run out because you always got to run into somebody. But I was talking to them, and they were like, "Hey, I really like that post and something something," and and then there's like the cashier who's ringing them up and then ringing me up, and he's like, "Oh, do you used to work here?" I was like, "Yeah, yeah, I used to work here." You
I was
know, and,
staff back in the
yeah,
day.
I was staff. Yeah. But yeah, I was like, yeah, I was number 286. My employee number, what's your employee number? And he's like 1972 or something like that. And I was like, yeah, so 1,700 people have come and gone from the day I was hired and the day you were hired. And but it was just really interesting, just to be there. And he was like, well, and he still, I don't think, knew that I had been the general. I mean, he didn't know. He didn't
Sure.
know.
Sure.
It's been since I was there,
Yeah.
whatever. But he was like, well, thanks for people like you who, made the decision, like he knew, he was like, oh, well, thanks so much for all that you gave, even though I don't think he knew who I was. Um,
That's so sweet.
it was really sweet, but then at some point I turned around and I said, I mean, this is my favorite grocery store in the whole world. And I remember I turned around at the check stand, there were just all these people. And I guess I said it kind of loud. And there were some other people in the other line, and they were like, yes. And it was like, yeah, we did this. We created this. It's a great store and a
Yeah.
great story. And it's just a river, like I was on the river of that story for a while and got out, but they've,
Right.
gone on to
Yes.
have this amazing life since then. And yeah, I don't know. I think in the end, grocery's pretty important, and it's a weird life's work, but that is where I'm at. I'm working with grocery stores.